Black CO mistaken for a janitor at his own headquarters. Hours later, he makes a bold announcement. The security guard at Verdanta Technologies barely looked up from his coffee as Elijah Washington badged in at 6:47 a.m. Most days, Elijah arrived in his usual tailored navy suits, but this Tuesday morning was different. He wore faded Levi's, scuffed Timberlands, and a charcoal hoodie that had seen better days, the same hoodie he'd worn during those sleepless nights 12 years ago when Verdanta was just a desperate dream scribbled on napkins. The elevator hummed as it descended to the basement level, a floor most Verdanta employees had forgotten existed. Elijah's reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors, a 42-year-old black man whose tired eyes held the weight of building something from absolutely nothing. His appearance this morning was intentional. He wanted to see the renovated archival space as it truly was, not through the lens of executive deference that usually surrounded him. The basement smelled like fresh paint and industrial carpet, a stark contrast to the musty, forgotten corner it had been just months ago. Elijah remembered the old smell, cleaning supplies, dust, and the faint scent of hope that had sustained him during those early days when this very storage room had been his unofficial headquarters. Back then, he'd had a key because he was the night janitor, not the CEO. As he walked through the pristine hallway, his fingers traced the smooth walls where water stains used to bloom like abstract art. The renovation was impressive, but something felt hollow about the transformation. It was too clean, too removed from the gritty reality that had birthed Verdanta's first breakthrough. "Excuse me." The sharp voice made Elijah turn. A young white man in an expensive charcoal suit strode toward him, his blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Everything about him screamed fresh MBA, from his confident posture to the way he held his phone like a weapon of corporate authority. "You're not supposed to be down here," the man continued, his tone carrying the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no. "This is a restricted area." Elijah studied the man's face, noting the Wharton class ring and the way his eyes barely registered Elijah as human. "I'm just looking around," Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying none of the commanding presence that usually filled boardrooms. "Looking around?" The man, his badge read Carter Bell, junior analyst, let out a dismissive laugh. "Listen, buddy, I don't know how you got down here, but maintenance staff isn't supposed to access this floor without supervision. There's sensitive equipment and—" Carter stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he noticed something behind Elijah. Near the far wall, a paper coffee cup lay on its side, its contents forming a dark puddle on the new tile floor. "Perfect," Carter muttered, then looked back at Elijah with the expression of someone who'd just solved a problem. "Since you're here anyway, clean that up. There's a maintenance closet right around the corner. And next time, use the service elevator." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elijah could have corrected him, could have pulled out his executive badge, could have mentioned that his name was literally engraved on the building's cornerstone. Instead, he found himself curious about this moment, about what it revealed and where it might lead. "Sure," Elijah said simply. Carter seemed surprised by the compliance, but quickly recovered his commanding demeanor. "Good. And make sure you do it right. This renovation cost the company 6 figures. He paused, then added with casual cruelty. "Though I guess you probably don't know what that means." As Carter's footsteps echoed back toward the elevator, Elijah stood alone in the hallway, processing what had just happened. The irony wasn't lost on him. In this exact spot, 15 years ago, he mopped similar spills while dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly distant. His younger self would have been amazed to know that one day he'd own the building, even if he was still being asked to clean its floors. He found the maintenance closet exactly where it had always been, though it was now stocked with premium supplies instead of the generic brands he remembered. As he filled a bucket with warm water, muscle memory kicked in, the precise ratio of cleaner to water, the most efficient way to wring out a mop. These were skills burned into his hands from countless nights spent maintaining these floors while his mind raced with business plans and innovation strategies. The coffee spill was small, probably from someone rushing to catch the elevator. As Elijah cleaned it, he remembered spills like this from his janitor days, except then, They'd been accompanied by casual dismissals, people stepping around him as if he were furniture, conversations stopping when he entered rooms and resuming when he left. But there was something different about this morning's encounter with Carter. It wasn't just the familiar sting of being invisible. It was the realization that some attitudes within Verdanta hadn't evolved at all. The company had grown from his basement storage room dreams into a $2.3 billion tech giant, but somewhere along the way, they'd lost the humility and respect for every person that had once been Verdanta's foundation. As he finished cleaning, Elijah noticed something that made his breath catch. Partially hidden under a new filing cabinet was a corner of yellowed paper, one of his original sketches from the early days. He knelt down and carefully extracted it, recognizing immediately his own handwriting outlining the core algorithm that had launched Verdanta's first product. The paper was wrinkled and coffee-stained, a relic from when his ideas were born in this exact space during stolen moments between cleaning bathrooms and emptying trash cans. He drafted business plans on the backs of discarded memos, sketched product designs on napkins, and practiced investor pitches to empty offices at 3 a.m. Standing in that renovated basement, holding his forgotten blueprint, Elijah felt the full weight of how far Verdanta had traveled, and how much they'd left behind. The company's mission statement now lived in marble lobbies and executive conference rooms, but its soul had been born down here, in the humble intersection of necessity and dreams. Carter's dismissive words echoed in his mind. "I guess you probably don't know what that means." The young analyst was wrong, of course. Elijah knew exactly what 6 figures meant. He knew what every dollar meant to build something meaningful. What Carter didn't understand was that true value wasn't measured in renovation costs or quarterly reports. It lived in the willingness to see potential in forgotten corners and dignity in every person. As Elijah carefully folded the old sketch and placed it in his hoodie pocket, he made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't correct Carter's assumption, not yet. Instead, he would let this moment teach him what Verdanta had become in the shadows of its success. The elevator doors closed behind him as he headed back upstairs, leaving the pristine basement and its polished surfaces. But he carried with him something far more valuable than renovated space. He carried the memory of where Verdanta's heart had started beating, and a growing determination to make sure it kept beating for everyone who walked these halls. The real work, Elijah realized, was just beginning. After returning the cleaning supplies, Elijah found himself drawn back to the basement. The encounter with Carter had stirred something deep inside him, a restlessness that demanded answers. He needed to understand not just what Verdanta had become, but what it had forgotten. The basement felt different now that he was alone. Without Carter's entitled presence, the space seemed to whisper stories from its past. Elijah walked slowly along the back wall, running his fingers across the smooth drywall until he found what he was looking for, a section that felt slightly different from the rest. He pressed gently, and a small panel gave way, revealing a hidden compartment he'd created years ago. Inside, wrapped in plastic and untouched by time, was a weathered composition notebook with a cracked spine and pages yellow around the edges. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it out. The notebook had been his Bible during those desperate early years. Every page contained hand-drawn schematics, revenue projections written in fading pencil, and a mission statement that he'd revised dozens of times until the words felt true. He opened to the first page and saw his younger self's careful handwriting. Verdanta Technologies, technology that serves people, not profits. As he read, the memories flooded back with startling clarity. December 2011. His beat-up Honda Civic had become his bedroom, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the owner let him use the restroom. During the day, he'd sit in the diner's corner booth, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while sketching algorithms on napkins. The waitress, Maria, never complained. She understood struggle in a way that most people didn't. "You're building something important," she'd tell him, refilling his cup without being asked. "I can see it in your eyes." Elijah turned the page and found his original product sketch, a data analytics platform designed to help small businesses compete with corporate giants. The margins were filled with notes about making technology accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford enterprise solutions. January 2012. The night janitor job at Morrison Industries, the company that would eventually become part of Verdanta's client base. He'd arrive at 10 p.m. and work until 6 a.m., but the real work happened during his breaks. He'd slip into empty conference rooms and practice his pitch to rows of vacant chairs, his voice echoing off glass walls that seemed impossibly high. Verdanta will democratize data, he'd tell the imaginary investors. Every corner store, every family restaurant, every struggling startup deserves the same analytical power as Fortune 500 companies. The notebook's pages revealed the evolution of his thinking. Early entries focused purely on technology, but as weeks turned to months, the mission deepened. He began writing about dignity, about creating opportunities for people who look like him, about building something that his grandmother, who'd cleaned houses her entire life, could be proud of. March 2012. His first real investor meeting. He'd spent his last $20 on a shirt from Goodwill and borrowed a tie from another janitor named Jerome. The investors, 3 white men in suits that cost more than his monthly food budget, listened politely for exactly 7 minutes before cutting him off. "It's an interesting concept," the lead investor had said, not bothering to hide his condescension. "But frankly, we're not sure you understand the market realities. Maybe come back when you have some real business experience." He'd walked out of that skyscraper and sat in his car for 2 hours, staring at the notebook that contained everything he believed in. For a moment, he'd considered giving up. Then he remembered Maria at the diner, Jerome who'd lent him the tie, his grandmother who'd believed education could change everything. He opened the notebook and wrote, "They don't see us yet. That's their mistake, not ours." Elijah found himself smiling at that entry, remembering the fierce determination that had carried him through 57 rejections before finally finding an investor who believed in his vision. But as he continued reading, his smile faded. The later entries in the notebook showed the gradual shift. The mission statements became more corporate, the sketches more focused on profit margins than social impact. Somewhere between securing series of funding and going public, Verdanta had lost its soul. He thought about Carter upstairs, probably bragging to colleagues about putting some janitor in his place. Carter represented everything Elijah had fought against: the casual cruelty of assumptions, the blindness to potential that lived in every person regardless of their title or appearance. But Carter was also a symptom, not the disease. The real problem was that Verdanta had grown so far from its roots that young analysts could work there without understanding what the company had been built on. They saw only the polished facade, not the midnight oil and desperate dreams that had created it. April 2013. His first hire, Rosa Martinez, a single mother who'd been laid off from 3 different companies. She'd answered phones during the day and taught herself coding at night. When he offered her the job, she'd cried. "No one's ever given me a real chance before," she'd said. "Everyone deserves a chance," he'd replied. "That's what we're building here." Now Rosa was Verdanta's chief technology officer, but somewhere along the way, they'd stopped hiring people who needed chances. They'd started recruiting from elite schools, prioritizing pedigree over potential. Elijah closed the notebook and leaned against the wall where his dreams had first taken shape. Carter's morning dismissal wasn't just an insult, it was a wake-up call. Verdanta had become exactly what he'd set out to challenge: a company that measured worth by appearances instead of ideas. But unlike his younger self, he now had the power to change things. He wouldn't correct Carter immediately. That would be too easy, too simple. Instead, he would use this moment to create something bigger, a fundamental realignment that would remind everyone at Verdanta where they'd come from and why it mattered. The basement had taught him everything he needed to know. Now it was time to teach Verdanta. By 9 a.m., Elijah had transformed. Gone were the faded jeans and hoodie, replaced by his signature charcoal Tom Ford suit, crisp white shirt, and the Hermes tie that had become something of a trademark in tech circles. He'd showered in his executive bathroom, applied cologne, and slicked back his hair with the precision that had graced countless magazine covers. The metamorphosis was complete. He looked every inch the CEO that Forbes had named Innovator of the Year 3 times running. The executive conference room on the 47th floor buzzed with the usual pre-meeting energy. Senior VPs clutched their tablets and smartphones, while junior analysts like Carter Bell hovered near the coffee station, eager to impress anyone who might advance their careers. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table that could seat 30 comfortably. Elijah entered quietly, nodding to familiar faces while taking his usual seat at the head of the table. He'd sat in the same chair for 8 years, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. But this morning, he felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. "Morning, everyone," said Patricia Hendricks, Verdanta's chief operating officer, calling the meeting to order. "Before we dive into quarterly projections, I believe Carter has some security observations from this morning's basement inspection." Elijah's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent. Carter stood with the eager confidence of someone about to deliver impressive news. At 26, he embodied everything corporate America valued: Ivy League education, family connections, and the kind of aggressive ambition that steamrolled over anyone deemed irrelevant. "Thank you, Patricia," Carter began, straightening his tie. "I wanted to report a significant security breach this morning. Around 7:15, I discovered an unauthorized individual in the restricted basement archive area." Murmurs rippled around the table. Security was always a hot topic, especially with Verdanta's recent contracts. "The individual claimed to be just looking around," Carter continued, making air quotes with obvious disdain. "He was dressed like maintenance staff, jeans, hoodie, the whole blue-collar uniform. Clearly hadn't followed proper authorization protocols." James Morrison, the silver-haired head of security, leaned forward. "Did you verify his credentials?" "I didn't need to," Carter replied smugly. "It was obvious he didn't belong there. I mean, the guy was confused about basic company procedures. I had to explain that maintenance staff needs supervision in sensitive areas." Several board members nodded approvingly. Elijah noticed how quickly they accepted Carter's version without question, their faces reflecting the same unconscious bias that had shaped Carter's assumptions. "What did you do?" asked Rebecca Walsh, the chief financial officer. Carter's chest puffed with pride. "I handled it professionally. Made him clean up a coffee spill that was creating a hazard, then explained proper protocols. He was actually quite compliant once I established authority. Sometimes you just need to be firm with people who don't understand corporate hierarchy." Quiet laughter rippled around the table. Elijah watched faces he'd known for years, colleagues who'd celebrated his successes, attended his wedding, praised his leadership in public forums. None of them questioned Carter's story. None of them wondered who the mysterious janitor might have been. "Good thinking, Carter," said Patricia. "We can't have random staff wandering through sensitive areas. James, perhaps we should review access protocols?" "Absolutely," Morrison agreed. "In fact, maybe we should keep that basement completely off-limits to general staff. Too much intellectual property down there. Let's restrict it to C-level executives only." The irony was exquisite. They were discussing barring employees from the very space where Verdanta's most important ideas had been born, by someone they would have classified as general staff. "Speaking of the basement," added Richard Steinberg, the longest-serving board member. "Wasn't that renovation expensive? 6 figures, if I remember correctly. We should protect that investment." He chuckled. "Can't have the help tracking mud through our pristine archives." More laughter. Elijah's hands remained folded, his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. These weren't evil people. They were successful, educated professionals who genuinely believed they were protecting company interests. But their casual dismissal of Carter's janitor revealed something darker, a complete disconnection from the humanity that made Verdanta possible. Carter was still basking in approval when Patricia shifted to the next agenda item. "Elijah, you're scheduled to announce the new AI integration platform today. Marketing has the press conference set for 2 p.m. All eyes turned to him. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, a product launch that analysts predicted would add another $1 billion to Verdanta's market cap. The technology was revolutionary, the marketing campaign flawless, the timing perfect. Elijah stood slowly, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm postponing the announcement," he said quietly. The silence was deafening. Patricia's pen stopped mid-note. Carter's confident smile faltered. "Postponing?" Rebecca's voice carried a hint of panic. "Elijah, we've already confirmed with TechCrunch, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. Cancel them," Elijah said firmly. "Instead, I'm calling a company-wide town hall for this afternoon. 4 p.m., main auditorium. Mandatory attendance for all staff, from senior executives to cafeteria workers to maintenance personnel. Everyone." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. James Morrison cleared his throat. "What's this about, Elijah? Is there a crisis we should know about?" Elijah's eyes swept the table, lingering briefly on Carter, who suddenly looked uncomfortable under the CEO's gaze. "Not a crisis," Elijah replied. "A awakening." He gathered his materials and stood. "Patricia, send the company-wide email. Everyone attends. No exceptions." As he walked toward the door, whispers erupted behind him. Board members exchanged worried glances, phones buzzed with urgent texts, and Carter sat frozen, a terrible realization beginning to dawn in his eyes. The most powerful CEO in tech had just canceled a billion-dollar announcement to hold a mysterious meeting. By noon, speculation would consume every floor of Verdanta headquarters. But Elijah was already planning something far more important than product launches. He was planning to remind his company what it meant to see people, all people, as human beings worthy of respect and recognition. The basement had taught him everything he needed to know. Now it was time to teach Verdanta. The Verdanta main auditorium hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Every seat in the 800-person venue was occupied, with employees standing along the walls and packed into the aisles. The energy was electric with anticipation. Rumors about the cancelled product launch had spread through the building like wildfire, spawning theories that ranged from major acquisitions to federal investigations. Tech journalists who'd been invited for the AI platform announcement sat in the front rows, cameras ready, expecting to witness the unveiling of Verdanta's next breakthrough. Marketing executives clutched their phones nervously, while engineers debated whether the company was pivoting strategy or facing some existential crisis. In the third row, Carter Bell sat rigid in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by a gnawing anxiety he couldn't quite explain. The CEO's lingering stare during the morning meeting had unsettled him, though he couldn't understand why. Around him, colleagues whispered speculation about emergency announcements and corporate restructuring. The stage lights dimmed, and conversations gradually quieted to an expectant hush. Instead of the usual grand entrance with promotional videos and orchestral fanfare, a single spotlight illuminated center stage. Elijah Washington walked out alone, but he wasn't carrying the tablet or presentation clicker that employees expected. In his right hand, he held a yellow mop bucket, the same bucket he'd used that morning to clean Carter's coffee spill. In his left hand was a warm composition notebook that looked completely out of place in the high-tech auditorium. The crowd's murmur grew confused. Journalists exchanged puzzled glances. This wasn't the polished corporate theater they'd anticipated. Elijah set the bucket down carefully at center stage, then approached the microphone. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual, intimate rather than commanding. "This morning," he began, "I was mistaken for a janitor in my own building." The auditorium fell silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "A young employee found me in our basement archives, dressed casually, and immediately assumed I was maintenance staff who'd wandered into a restricted area." Elijah's eyes found Carter in the crowd, though he didn't point him out. "He ordered me to clean up a coffee spill. And you know what I did?" He gestured to the mop bucket. "I cleaned it up." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience, but Elijah's expression remained serious. "Many of you are probably thinking this employee made an honest mistake. Wrong place, wrong assumption, easily corrected. But I want to tell you why this moment changed everything for me." He opened the weather notebook, and the projection screen behind him lit up with a photograph of the first page. Hand-drawn schematics covered in coffee stains and pencil smudges. 15 years ago, I was actually a janitor. Not the CEO of Verdanta, not the innovator of the year. I was the guy who cleaned these offices at night while you slept in your beds, dreaming of success. The auditorium was now completely silent. Carter's face had gone pale. I lived in my car for 8 months. I sketched Verdanta's first algorithms on napkins from a diner where the waitress took pity on me. And yes, I drafted our original business plan in that same basement storage room where I was mistaken for a janitor this morning, because that's exactly what I was. The screen changed to show another page from the notebook, revenue projections written in fading pencil, margins filled with desperate notes about making payroll and finding investors. Every night, after mopping these floors and emptying your trash cans, I would slip into empty conference rooms and practice pitching to rows of vacant chairs. I was invisible to the people who worked here during the day, just another black man in a janitor's uniform, someone to step around, someone whose presence didn't require acknowledgement. Elijah's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But being invisible taught me something powerful. It taught me that breakthrough ideas don't care about your title. Innovation doesn't require a corner office. The algorithm that launched Verdanta was conceived at 2 a.m. in a storage closet, sketched on the back of a discarded memo someone had thrown away. He held up a yellowed piece of paper, the same sketch he'd found that morning. This is Verdanta's actual birth certificate. Not the polished origin story in our marketing materials, not the sanitized version in our annual reports. This coffee-stained piece of trash paper that someone threw away, this is where a $2 billion company began. The screen now showed the original mission statement. Technology that serves people, not profits. That young employee this morning wasn't just making assumptions about my clothes or my skin color. He was revealing what we've become, a company that measures worth by appearance instead of ideas, that values pedigree over potential, that's forgotten the janitor's storage room where our dreams were born. Carter was now visibly trembling, his hands gripping his chair arms as the full weight of his morning encounter crashed over him. I didn't correct him because I wanted to understand what Verdanta looks like to someone who only sees surfaces. And what I discovered broke my heart. We've built glass ceilings above the janitor's closet where our company was actually conceived. Elijah's voice softened, becoming almost conversational. That employee told me I probably didn't understand what 6 figures meant. He was wrong. I understand exactly what 6 figures means, and more importantly, I understand what it feels like when people assume you don't belong somewhere, when they treat you like you're invisible, when they measure your worth by their biases instead of your potential. The silence in the auditorium was profound. Many employees were wiping away tears, while others sat in stunned recognition of their own unconscious assumptions. Today was supposed to be about announcing our new AI platform. Instead, I'm announcing something more important. Verdanta is going back to its roots. We're going to remember that good ideas can come from anywhere, that respect isn't earned through titles, and that the most valuable innovations often come from the people others choose not to see. Elijah picked up the mop bucket and held it high. This isn't a symbol of shame. It's a reminder of where we started, and who we're building for. Tomorrow, we begin the real work of transformation. The standing ovation began slowly, then built into something powerful and sustained. But Elijah's eyes were on Carter, who sat frozen in his seat, finally understanding exactly who he'd dismissed that morning, and what it meant for everything that came next. The applause had barely faded when Elijah raised his hand for silence. The energy in the auditorium was electric, but he could see the mixture of emotions on faces throughout the crowd: inspiration, guilt, confusion, and in some cases, fear about what these revelations might mean for their careers. Speeches are easy, Elijah continued, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. Real change requires action. So let me tell you exactly what's going to happen, starting tomorrow. He gestured to the projection screen, which now displayed a detailed organizational chart. First, we're launching the Founders Fellowship, a program that would have changed my life 15 years ago. Every janitor, cafeteria worker, security guard, administrative assistant, and entry-level employee at Verdanta will have the opportunity to pitch business ideas directly to our executive team. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. This wasn't the incremental change employees had expected. Each quarter, we'll select 5 ideas for development, with full seed funding of $50,000 per project. The fellows will work directly with our R&D teams, keeping their current salaries while developing their concepts. If their ideas prove viable, they'll have the option to lead the implementation teams. Patricia Hendricks, visible in the front row, was frantically taking notes. Rebecca Walsh looked simultaneously intrigued and concerned about the financial implications. Second, Elijah continued, we're implementing mandatory empathy immersion for every executive and senior manager. Quarterly, you'll spend 1 full week working alongside different departments, not observing, not supervising, but actually performing the work. You'll clean offices, serve food, answer phones, and process paperwork. You'll remember what it feels like to be essential but invisible. The silence from the executive section was deafening. Several senior VPs exchanged worried glances, while middle managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Third, we're restructuring our promotion and hiring processes to dismantle the status hierarchies that have infected our culture. Starting immediately, 50% of all new hires must come from non-traditional backgrounds, community colleges, trade schools, career transition programs. We're going to actively recruit people who need opportunities, not just those who've already had them. James Morrison raised his hand tentatively. Elijah, how do we ensure these candidates have the necessary qualifications? Elijah's smile was sharp. James, 15 years ago, I had a high school diploma and a janitor's uniform. Today, I run a company worth $2.3 billion. Maybe we should reconsider what necessary qualifications actually mean. The point landed with surgical precision. Morrison nodded slowly, his face reddening slightly. Fourth, we're creating transparent salary bands and promotion criteria. Every employee will know exactly what's required to advance, and bias training will be mandatory for anyone involved in hiring or promotion decisions. We're going to measure inclusion, not just talk about it. The screen changed to show concrete metrics, diversity percentages, promotion rates by background, and salary equity audits. Finally, Elijah said, his voice growing quieter but more intense, we're converting that basement archive into a collaborative innovation space. We're calling it The Roots, a place where any employee can go to work on ideas, access resources, and remember that Verdanta's greatest innovations came from the most humble beginnings. He paused, letting the magnitude of these changes settle over the crowd. Then his eyes found Carter in the third row. Carter had gone completely rigid. His face was ashen, his hands trembling slightly as the full scope of his morning encounter crystallized in his mind. Around him, colleagues were nodding approvingly, some even applauding, but Carter remained frozen. Elijah's gaze lingered on the young analyst for just a moment, not accusatory, not angry, but penetrating. In that brief exchange, Carter saw everything: the CEO's quiet dignity during their morning encounter, his own casual cruelty and assumptions, the profound irony of ordering the company's founder to clean up a mess. But Elijah said nothing. He didn't call Carter out, didn't embarrass him publicly, didn't even acknowledge their morning interaction. Instead, he simply looked away, leaving Carter to sit with the devastating weight of his own realization. These changes begin tomorrow, Elijah announced to the full auditorium. But transformation starts with each of us examining our own assumptions, our own biases, our own capacity to see potential in unexpected places. He picked up the weather notebook one final time. This company was built on the idea that everyone deserves a chance to innovate, to contribute, to be seen. We're going back to that foundation, and we're going to build something better on top of it. As employees began filing out, conversations erupted throughout the auditorium. Some executives looked worried about the practical implications, while others seemed energized by the ambitious vision. Junior employees were animated, suddenly seeing new possibilities for their careers. But Carter remained in his seat long after the auditorium had mostly emptied. He stared at the stage where the mop bucket still sat under the lights, remembering his confident dismissal of the janitor, who dared to enter a restricted area. The man he'd ordered to clean up a coffee spill was the same person who just announced a complete restructuring of corporate America's most innovative company. The maintenance worker he'd lectured about company protocols had built those protocols from nothing. Around him, the last stragglers headed toward the exits, their voices filled with excitement about the changes ahead. But Carter sat frozen, understanding that in one casual morning encounter, he'd revealed everything that was wrong with the company culture, and that the CEO had witnessed it all. Tomorrow would bring new policies, new opportunities, and new ways of seeing people. But first, Carter had to figure out how to see himself clearly for the very first time. 6 weeks later, Vedanta Technologies hummed with a different energy entirely. The transformation hadn't been cosmetic, it had been fundamental, reaching into every corner of the company like roots growing through fertile soil. The basement level, once forgotten and sterile, now pulsed with creative activity. The roots, as everyone had begun calling it, bore little resemblance to the pristine archive space Carter had zealously guarded. The walls were covered with whiteboards filled with sketches, equations, and brainstorming sessions from employees across every department. Comfortable seating areas encouraged collaboration, and the latest technologies sat alongside simple notebooks and colored pens. Dr. Sarah Chin, who'd started as a part-time administrative assistant while finishing her engineering degree, was now leading a team developing accessible AI interfaces for disabled users. Marcus Williams, a security guard who'd been writing code on his phone during overnight shifts, had his inventory management algorithm approved for company-wide testing. The Founders Fellowship wasn't just changing individual lives, it was generating innovations that Vedanta's traditional hiring process would never have discovered. The Empathy Immersion program had created equally profound shifts. Patricia Hendricks, after spending a week in the cafeteria, had completely restructured the employee benefits package. James Morrison, following his stint with the cleaning crew, had implemented new protocols that treated maintenance staff as the security partners they'd always been. Even Rebecca Walsh had emerged from her week in customer service with fresh insights about user experience that were reshaping product development. But perhaps the most visible change was in the daily interactions throughout the building. Conversations that once stopped when service staff entered rooms now continued, and often expanded to include new perspectives. The casual hierarchies that had once defined Vedanta's culture were dissolving, replaced by something more collaborative and genuinely respectful. Carter Bell had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The young analyst who'd once commanded a CEO to clean up spills now volunteered for the most challenging empathy assignments. He'd spent weeks working alongside the teams he'd previously dismissed, learning not just their jobs but their stories, their struggles, and their unrealized potential. The experience had humbled him completely, but it had also revealed a capacity for growth that surprised everyone, including himself. "I thought I knew what success looked like," Carter had confided to his mentor during a recent review. "Turns out I didn't know what respect looked like." His arrogance had been replaced by genuine curiosity about others' experiences. The Wharton MBA still mattered, but now it was balanced by something more valuable: the wisdom that came from recognizing his own limitations and biases. On this particular Thursday evening, as most employees headed home to their families, Elijah found himself drawn back to the roots. He'd made this pilgrimage several times over the past weeks, always discovering new evidence of the cultural shift he'd set in motion. Tonight, he settled into the same corner where he'd once hidden his notebook, where desperation and dreams had collided to create something remarkable. The space looked nothing like the storage closet it had been, but somehow it felt exactly right, alive with the same innovative spirit that had driven him through those impossible early years. He pulled out a fresh notebook, its pages blank with possibility. The old composition book with its coffee-stained sketches sat permanently displayed in a place of honor near the entrance, but tonight was about writing the next chapter. "Excuse me, Mr. Washington?" Elijah looked up to see Rosa Martinez approaching nervously. Not Rosa the CTO, this was a different Rosa, a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s who worked in the cafeteria. She clutched a folder against her chest, her expression mixing hope with apprehension. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued, "but I heard about the Founders Fellowship, and I've been working on something during my breaks." "Please sit down," Elijah said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "What have you been working on?" Rosa's eyes lit up as she opened her folder, revealing detailed sketches and research notes. "It's an eco-packaging solution for food service. I've been watching how much waste we generate in the cafeteria, and I think I've figured out a way to create completely compostable containers that are actually cheaper than what we're using now." Her presentation was thorough and passionate. She'd researched suppliers, calculated costs, and even tested prototypes using materials from her kitchen at home. The solution was elegant, environmentally sound, and potentially revolutionary for the food service industry. "Rosa," Elijah said quietly, "this is exactly the kind of thinking that's going to change everything. Have you considered that this could work beyond just our cafeteria? This could be a product Vedanta develops and licenses to companies nationwide." Her eyes widened. I hadn't thought that big. I just wanted to help with the waste problem. The best innovations start with wanting to solve real problems," Elijah replied, remembering his own journey from storage closet to boardroom. "Would you be interested in leading a development team to explore this further?" As Rosa nodded enthusiastically, Elijah felt the same electric potential he'd experienced 15 years ago, when dreams seemed impossible but hope remained unstoppable. Here, in this transformed space, with this cafeteria worker whose brilliant idea might revolutionize sustainable packaging, he was witnessing Vedanta's future being born. He picked up his pen and wrote the first line in his new notebook. "Vedanta 2.0 Innovation from every corner, opportunity for every person." Rosa was already sketching modifications to her design, her initial nervousness replaced by the focused intensity of someone whose potential had finally been recognized and encouraged. Looking around the roots, watching this cafeteria worker develop ideas that could change industries, Elijah smiled and wrote one final line beneath his mission statement. "Good ideas don't care what floor you work on."